When you think about it, money is kind of a weird thing. I mean, these fancy little pieces of cloth would be useless on a deserted island, and we're the only animals who use money in this way. Yet money is probably the most important piece of our modern society, even in non-capitalist societies, for better or for worse. So how did money and currency develop and evolve alongside human society itself? Sponsored by NordVPN. Studies of the New York Stock Exchange over the 20th century, combined with records of local weather patterns, have shown that the markets tend to perform ever so slightly better on sunny days than on cloudy days. This seems weird at first. After all, the weather doesn't affect the value of the stocks being traded, but it does affect the moods of the investors trading them. Not ludicrously enough to mean anything game-changing, but still measurably enough to be interesting. Although do remember that correlation does not equal causation. Although the flow of money can be measured rationally, humans at our nature are irrational, and the economy, for all its automation, is still very much tied to human behavior, a system evolved to seek out potential opportunities and avoid potential threats. Now, when I said that humans are the only species to use money, what that absolutely does not mean is that animals don't trade. In nature, animals and even plants frequently team up with one another in mutually beneficial or symbiotic relationships. These relationships have partners trading food for grooming, food for pollination, or protection from larger threats for protection from smaller threats. Every species occupies some sort of biological niche, essentially the role they play in the larger ecosystem, and different niches often complement each other. While a tick may latch onto larger animals like deer or antelopes to extract vital nutrients from them in an arrangement known as parasitism, since it only benefits the parasite, often to the detriment of the host, birds like the oxpecker feed on these little parasites in an arrangement beneficial to both itself and to the host, as the bird gets a free meal and the host gets relief from the parasites, and the parasites get a first-class ticket down to the bird's gullet. Perhaps not surprisingly, given that we evolved in this ecosystem, human societies aren't exactly all that different. Once humans were able to provide a surplus of calories to feed people, meaning not everyone needed to collect food for themselves, our species itself started to split into different niches, or specializations. Some humans still worked in collecting food, but some could start making tools to help the farmers and those who protected the group from outside threats, as well as for those who did other things, like building buildings, weaving clothes, or irrigating croplands. It is often told, even by me, that money was invented as humanity outgrew the barter system, the trading of one good for another good, and holding both parties assign equal value to them. However, no evidence of a barter-only system has ever truly been found in commercial history, at least not outside small groups. While it might do for a small hunter-gatherer band, a city can't realistically sustain itself on a pure barter economy. After all, if you make shoes but need a hammer for something, tough luck if the only hammer maker in town is already happy with their current shoes. These earliest of economies more likely relied on what's called a gift economy, where goods and services and essentials are given not with the expectation of an immediate return, but in the hope that the recipient will return the favor in due time. It isn't known exactly when money as we know it first popped up, but almost universally, people figured out that trade works best when you use a medium of exchange that's mutually valuable even if it has no intrinsic value, is easy to add up or divide, can last for a reasonably long time in storage, and can't be replicated too easily. Precious metals, cowrie shells, beads, salt, livestock, animal pelts, and even giant 4-meter wide stones were all used as currency by different cultures all around the world. Hi, 1 stick of gum please. Interestingly, many early agricultural societies may have used objects like these, particularly livestock, in things like paying tributes or arranging marriages, not necessarily for the trading of goods. Hi, want to arrange marriage between my son and your daughter, please? Weirdo. Among other goods, grain and livestock were largely used for these such exchanges, though crops and animals take time to grow to fruition, introducing the need for debt and credit, and the need for something to catalog a person's debts and credits. Something like a writing system, perhaps? With the advent of the first cities in Mesopotamia, farmers would deposit grain to the local temple, receiving in exchange a clay tablet with their deposit recorded on it for paying off debts to the temple. In a sense, giving birth to representative money, where something without any real intrinsic value is used to represent something that does, as opposed to commodity money, which is money that itself has some sort of intrinsic value. Trade between cities, however, mandated the use for an agreed-upon medium of exchange, for which metals were most often used, as they were seen as mutually valuable, even though they couldn't exactly be eaten if you got lost in the desert, were easy to add or divide, can last a very long time, probably how I know about them today, and weren't all that easy to replicate outside the local silver mine, though people did still make counterfeits with copper or zinc. These metals, though, were just random pieces of metal at different weights. The first uniform pieces of metal used for trade date back to the Zhou dynasty in ancient China, with so-called spade money invented around 1000 BC. Coins as we know them today, though, first appeared in around the 7th century BC in the region of Lydia, centered around what is now Turkey's third largest city, Izmir, and quickly spread throughout the Greek city-states, at first as a kind of token for trading, but later a form of standardized national currency in empires from Alexander's empire to the east to the Roman Empire to the west. Coins are a great example of representative money, but there is one problem that everyone who's ever been to Europe would know. If you're transporting a lot of them, they can be quite cumbersome. In Tang Dynasty China, around the 11th century AD, a type of promissory note called jiaozi came into existence. Promissory notes are essentially written promises stating that person A will pay back person B whatever debts they may owe them, and as such, these notes became the first real form of paper money, or at least the first form that really caught on. Europe got wind of this invention through travelers like Marco Polo and William of Rybrook, and in the midst of the busy trade scene all across Europe, these notes started to be issued for these purposes by the banks, i.e., bank notes. They were essentially like the clay tablets used in Babylon for grain deposits, only instead of a farmer's harvest, it was someone's personal stash of coins, and instead of clay receipts for a tribute to the temple, it's pieces of paper saying, I own this specific amount of a special metal, which you could then give to someone else, so now they own that specific amount of a special metal. By the mid-17th century, these banknotes morphed into being used for all debts and exchanges, effectively becoming paper money as we use it today. Or at least as we did when it was still backed by gold or silver, but we'll get to that in a bit. Banks at this point even began issuing more notes than they actually had in metal coins as loans, under the assumption that they wouldn't have to pay it all back at once, a practice known as fractional reserve banking. By the 18th and 19th centuries, banknotes had effectively evolved into a nation's official representative currency, alongside the coins, and so the responsibility of issuing banknotes was moved over to the national banks and mints. Although some currencies were still printed by private banks, as is still the case today with some, more and more currencies moved over to the gold standard, as opposed to being backed by silver, largely relying on the British pound or the US dollar, with the latter becoming the dominant reserve currency of the world, meaning that most currencies weren't actually directly tied to the gold standard, but were largely dependent on the US dollar, which was itself tied to gold prices. This system of backing these bills with special metals, however, didn't prove quite capable of handling all the monetary highs and lows presented during the World Wars, and would be put to an end, largely but not entirely, starting in 1971, with Richard Nixon separating the US dollar from the gold standard, turning it and all the currencies that tagged along into free-floating fiat currencies. So now $1 wasn't worth a certain amount of gold, it was just worth $1. One large motivation for this is that in order to be able to back up your country's money with gold, your country's vaults need to actually have that much gold, which isn't exactly the most stable setup, at least in hindsight. By the late 20th century, payment cards like credit and debit cards started to become more commonplace, evolving from a special keychain token issued by a department store to a plastic card issued by a bank. With advancements like this, money in the current day has largely shifted to being digital, and not just in all the cryptocurrencies popping up. So essentially, the entire history of money is us assigning something some form of value for paying off debts, and then saying, nah, it's too cumbersome and unwieldy, let's invent something more convenient. Of course, that's not a bad thing at all. In fact, that's kind of the story of all our inventions. Because if there's one thing us humans are good at, it's working hard on new ways to be lazy. Ah, what a beautiful day to go online. I think I'm gonna log into socialmedia.com and... Wait, what?
Now I know all your secrets. With this information, I will spy on you and reveal your private information to the world.
Oh no, some lowlife with nothing better to do than hack other people's computers just hacked my computer. Now everyone will know my irrational affinity for this random female celebrity that will be totally embarrassing to show. Whatever could I do to prevent this from happening again? Well, concerned internetizen, one way would be going to nordvpn.com/KhAnubis and getting yourself a subscription to NordVPN. NordVPN is a virtual private network service that protects your online activity from potential espionage and allows you to mask your IP address so you can also tell the internet that you're in one of dozens of different countries all across the Nord, Süd, Ost, West, or Mitte. Now, most people, including myself, will probably mostly find it useful for YouTube and streaming services like Netflix, as their libraries often vary drastically across the different borders that we're currently not allowed to cross. In fact, Hulu is only available in the United States for some reason, which I found annoying because I love the Orville, but I also love living in Europe. But with NordVPN, that hasn't been an issue whatsoever. If this sounds like something you'd like, go to nordvpn.com/KhAnubis and use the code KHANUBIS at checkout for a massive discount on a 2-year plan and get an extra month for free. And while you're at it, you'll also be helping to support the channel. Thank you as always for watching. I've been wanting to make more videos in this sort of style, so let me know what you think about these more general history videos. Thanks to R2 from the channel Geo Perspective for that cool map animation earlier. Go subscribe to his channel. And as always, you can help out this channel by liking, sharing, pledging on Patreon or buying merch, and of course subscribing to learn something new every other Sunday.